All right, folks. People continue to trickle in. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today on our and just folks who may have come in after we had begun. Just to let everybody know, today's event will be recorded to be available later. And again, my name is Trevor Kerwin. I am the director of partnerships at Sheeva.ai. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today for our sixth webinar, Understanding the EV Charging Customer Experience. And again, this is our part of our ongoing content series here at Sheeva to educate folks around the connected car ecosystem and the use cases for how we will be doing what we will be doing in our cars in the coming years. From every type of transaction to how you will be knowing where you are in real time and knowing how to interact with the rest of the retail and transactional ecosystem around you. Again, my name is Trevor Kerwin. You've met me here before. Hope some of you have come back from previous webinars. And a little bit more in depth from us about what we do here at Sheeva. Sheeva has developed an in-car payments and commerce solution that introduces vehicle location-based services to monetize the driver experience. Sheeva's patented precise geolocation technology lets drivers seamlessly pay and receive services, including EV charging, which is what we're going to be focusing on here today, but also fueling, curbside pickup, drive-through, parking, etc., without ever having to leave the comfort of the vehicle. Our technology automatically detects the vehicle at a specific location. That location technology is critical. A gas pump, a parking spot, an EV charging space, whatever, or drive-through lane. And we enable payments right on the in-vehicle infotainment screen or in an OEM mobile app too. Again, just mentioned, I can't believe it. I think I've been here for hosting all of these now. This is our sixth webinar in the last year or so with Sheeva. So join us for our ongoing quarterly webinar series. That's what we're trying to do here, to bring you new information. And keep an eye out as well. We've got another content stream, our new podcast, That New Car Sense. It's on Spotify. Me and some of my colleagues here are pulling that together on a monthly basis, and it's kind of a rundown of the news as we see around the space, and also bringing on some special guests to talk. So it's kind of an extension of what we're doing in the webinar. So thanks for keep an eye out for that as well. A little bit of housekeeping here about our webinar house rules. How do I ask a question? It's very easy. Click the Q&A button that you'll see, or you'll see a chat button here, I believe, on this. We're using Teams now. We've moved over from Zoom, so I believe it is the chat function. Feel free to ask a question. That's really important for people in the audience. This is a big part. You're a big part of what we do this for. So that's why we encourage you to ask questions. You can ask questions at any time in the chat, but we'll probably come back to them at the end after we finish our presentation. And again, we mentioned this is being recorded. It's generally available within the week via our YouTube channel, and we can follow up with links as needed. Now, about today's webinar. We're going to kick off here. We're going to throw it to Kevin Costner here in a moment. Costner, not Costner. I know there's been some confusion. Maybe that's why we got more pickup than usual. Kevin's he's with the head of partnerships with EverCharge. And he's going to be talking about scaling to meet the coming tsunami of EVs. And again, this is a big deal. The EV charging infrastructure world has nearly doubled in the last couple of years, let's say. There's over 120,000. I know Kevin's probably going to touch on that a bit. There's over 120,000 charging stations installed, and this wild west of growth will continue as EVs themselves move from, I believe, 2% of all new vehicle sales in second quarter of last year to 10% at the fourth quarter of last year. So, and that's just in a few months. But it's a very fragmented marketplace. While most EV charging events will still happen with private chargers, either at the EV owner's home or at their place of work or at a base, think of a fleet operator of EVs. They'll come back to return to a base to charge up. The access to public networks is also going to be critical as we grow forward, and you'll see a lot of brands out there that are offering EV charging networks. But with these public charging networks, um, there's a lot of hardware choices, a lot of who gets involved on the utility side. We're shifting this energy diet from gasoline to electricity. So there's utility involvement. What are the best business models? Where are the development opportunities going to be going forward? How do we make clients happier in this space with the customer experience? It's all new for a lot of people, right? So that's what we're going to be digging into over the whole webinar. Kevin's going to be addressing a big piece of that at the start here with about 50 minutes of a presentation about EverCharge and about how things will work. And then we're going to bring up the rest of our guests. One note here: we were having one of our guests, unfortunately, has gotten ill at the last moment. We wish Gary from the EV Alliance, CEO of EV Alliance. We hope he's feeling better, and we really want to have him back on at some future event as well for to talk about EV charging in smart cities. He's a great guy. He's a great guest. Unfortunately, he's feeling quite out of the weather. So Gary, we hope you're feeling better soon, and we'll be talking to you soon. So we'll do a group discussion with me and Kevin and a couple of my colleagues, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A. So we look forward to getting started. So with that, Kevin, I will introduce Kevin Costner again, head of partnerships for EverCharge. And Kevin, maybe just say a bit about yourself, and then you can go into your presentation.
Happy to. Thanks, Trevor. So I'm Kevin Costner. I'm head of business development and partnerships at EverCharge, and I've been with EverCharge about 3 years. And my background prior to that did bunch of stuff in the IoT world, and years and years and years before that was all in cellular connectivity, dealing with bringing cellular connectivity into buildings and structures that otherwise wouldn't have it. So kind of been in the tech field for quite a while, and this EV space and the opportunities it affords and the demands and the desires and the needs are really exciting to talk about. So I love coming on and chatting about these things to help hopefully push adoption rates faster and get this infrastructure installed that we so desperately need.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming, and we'll jump on in. Tell us about the tsunami.
All right. Well, let me hopefully I can do the old screen share thing here, which I'm hoping is open the share tray, which does not seem to want to do anything.
I can at the same time here while you're doing that, Kevin. Maybe I'll help you out here a bit too. I think. Right. Sure. And maybe I can do that for you here, and then you can just tell me to move the slides if needed.
There you go. Perfect.
Very good.
Always a backup plan,
Technology. You think we have all these mastered by now?
Yes. All right. So EV charging, scaling to meet the coming tsunami. Very important issue, and let's move right into talking about EverCharge just a little bit. Short bit about us: we are a fully integrated EV charging manufacturer. We are an OEM, and we specialize in real-time power managed technology. Our fully integrated solutions are all hardware and software. We also handle all the services post-install. And the key to what we do, and this presentation really kind of hits home on the importance of this, is we do minimize infrastructure requirements while maximizing the number of EVSEs, level 2 EVSEs that we can install per site. And this is an exponentially greater number over any other technology out there. We are a North American provider. We support throughout North America, and our product is 100% made in the USA, actually right in the Bay Area. So we can move on from there. Oh, by the way, we've been around, just in case anyone is curious, we've been around for over 9 years. One of the early entrants into this market, and we specialize in high volume parking environments, so such as apartments, condos, office, commercial, industrial complexes, fleets, parking garages, and just about anywhere else a lot of vehicles sit for an extended period of time. So what we're really hitting home about in today's discussion are 3 facts. Number 1, we have an acute inadequate number of currently deployed EV chargers in the US, and that's level 2 and level 3. And when I say acute, I mean, we are a third world nation when it comes to charging infrastructure. It's really embarrassing that the United States of America is so far behind many other countries in the world with this infrastructure. The level 2 needs, which is really the driving need in this country, not level 3, we need millions of them, millions of them. The challenge to get to those numbers, the major barrier is electrical capacity and the limited amount of that capacity that exists in every single structure everywhere. So let's dig right into it. Jump right on, Trevor. Okay.
There we go.
Dance a little bit. So by the end of last year, there were roughly 2 million EVs on the road in the US. And by the end of this year, it's expected that number will double. Now, when that statistic, at the end of 2021, we didn't have gas prices in many parts of the country topping $7, $8 a gallon. Other parts of the country, it's well into the fives. So this sudden run up in the price of gasoline, that is 100% unjustified, given that we hardly use any oil coming from Russia. Means the oil companies, because oil is a global market, the cost of a barrel of oil is controlled by the world market, even though the production costs in the US have not gone up. So buy stock in Chevron and Exxon and all those guys, because they're going to reap massive profits from what's going on right now, which means we have no control of what we pay for gas. So obviously a lot more people are going to be buying their EVs much sooner than they had ever anticipated. So, keep that in mind. Doubling by the end of 2022, if these gas prices stay up and Tesla and GM and Ford and the others can actually get enough units off the assembly line, it's very possible by the end of 2022, it could well more than double. The infrastructure, right now we have about 1 public charging station per 20 EVs in the US. Oops.
Sorry.
There, Trevor, it's okay. 1 public charging station per 20 EVs in the US today. And by the end of 22, it'll be 1 in 40. Keep that in mind. The number of vehicles to the number of chargers is getting worse, not better. Go ahead, Trevor. So this market acceleration in EV sales, I just pointed out a major driver that is very topical, very current. This year alone, there's estimated to be about 38 new EVs rolling off the assembly line, 38 new EV models off the assembly line. And, this is mostly from legacy OEMs and, of course, Tesla. There are some other what I call new age OEMs. Rivian's one of them, and Fisker and others. But as of right now, it doesn't look like they're going to be putting much in the way of volume to those numbers. Tesla, of course, is leading the bunch. They're doing, of course, Elon Musk doing a phenomenal job in building and delivering and hitting targets. So, really a large part of that driving demand in the US and the number of models coming out will be from Tesla still. You also have to keep in mind that delivery of last mile fleet electric vehicles has started. The Ford e-Transit van. Rivian's trying to scale up and start delivering on their electric last mile delivery van. Of course, you have GM, Mercedes-Benz, and others. This is really going to start happening this year, and of course, accelerate into 2023. And then, of course, the economics I mentioned. You just have amazing economics for converting to electric. Companies and individuals will continue to accelerate their decision making as, of course, the cost of owning a gas-powered car continues to go up. And the lack of control one has over the cost of continuing to fuel those vehicles. Moving on. So the U.S. charging market is a two-sided market. You have public and you have private. The public market is the one that gets all the focus. Every time you hear about the government's infrastructure plan to install 500 chargers, they're talking public. Every time you hear people talk about level 3, they're talking public. Highways, rest stops, etc. Very, very critical. The United States gets public charging on the highways, in the rest stops, in some of the gas stations where people drive long distance. It's critically important. Has to be there. But the fact is, except for those types of environments where vehicles really need to pull in, quick charge, get back on the road, everything else in the public space is a level 2 charger, not a level 3. The public market is really only 5% of the charging infrastructure need. Only 5%. It's an important 5%, but it's still only 5%. Let's move on. The private market is 95% of the market. And the major markets for private-based charging are high volume parking environments. Now, what does that mean? It means anywhere vehicles, and lots of them, sit for an extended period of time. Apartment buildings, condos, office, commercial, industrial complexes, mixed use environments. You have government buildings, educational institutions, you have fleet operators. Every single one of those, you see people's cars sitting. Obviously, some of them, they sit overnight, such as where people live in condos and apartments. And the other ones, it's where people work, where vehicles sit for a long time. You pull into the office, you park your car, you go into an office building, you sit for 8-9 hours, and your car sits there doing nothing. Fleet operators are a little bit different, of course, but still the vast majority of fleet operations, the vehicles have extended dwell times of 8 to 12 hours every night for every vehicle. School buses, same thing. School buses sit in their depots for a very long time every day before they roll out the next day. Go on, Trevor. So the need, from a public standpoint, from charging infrastructure, you're talking about the infrastructure plan again. You can't find a news feed where they're not talking about 500,000 public chargers. It's critical, as I mentioned before, for long distance driving. The fact is, the public-based charging, where it's not road-centric, meaning long-distance driving, is important in more of an urban suburban area where people don't have access to charging where they live and work. And this is a key distinction here. There are parts of the country, there are communities, there are cities and parts of cities where people just do not and cannot have access to convenient charging where they live. And that's just a fact. But the fact is, and it remains, that you can charge where you live and work. For the first time in the history of transportation, in the 120-year history of vehicles, you can fuel up where you live and work. That was not possible with gasoline-powered cars, and we can all be thankful that they never let people install gas pumps in their garages. I can only wonder about the explosive outcome of that possibility. So when you look at it from a private standpoint in these high-volume parking environments, what's the need? Well, there are a lot of apartments and condos in the US. Approximately 45% of the population live in multi-tenant housing. There are millions of EVSEs needed just in apartments and condos alone. Millions. Office, commercial, industrial complexes need millions more. You look at government facilities at every local, state, federal level. Every single facility needs charging. Education, every university, college, and even some high schools need charging. And then you have fleet. In the US today, there are over 10 million fleet vehicles of all shapes and size and use case. 10 million. And most of them require level 2 charging on a one-to-one relationship of vehicle to charger. That means that there's upwards of 10 million level 2 EVSEs required just to support fleet applications in the US. Now, currently in the US, there's about 112,000 charging ports installed today, plus or minus something. 112,000. You take a moment, think about that. Some of the other players in our industry, some of our competitors like to brag about how many EVSEs they have installed. They've been in business for a long time, and they've got so many thousands of chargers installed throughout the entire United States. The reality is they need to shut up and stop talking about that because it's embarrassing to them. They've been in business for years, and that's the best they could do. 112,000 ports related to a need of millions upon millions of chargers is a scary ratio. And that is why this presentation is here and why I hammer home the subject. We need charging infrastructure installed at scale today. And you look at people demanding convenience as driving that demand. A lot of the news stuff you read about, and they're trying to continue the brainwashing idea that you need to go somewhere. You go somewhere anyway to fuel up. So don't worry about it. We'll convert gas stations, and you will drive to a gas station and plug in. Even at a level 3 charger, if your vehicle battery is drained down a long ways, it's still 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes of charging. Are you going to drive to a gas station, plug in, and go hang out in the 7-Eleven sucking Slurpees for a half hour? I don't think so. If you live in Boston and it's February and someone tells you have to go to the gas station to fuel up and plug your car in for 15, 20, or 30 minutes, and it's a blizzard, you going to be too happy about that? I don't think so. So the fact is, people are demanding convenience. They are not going to want to go anywhere to fuel up. They're going to want to do it where they live and work, and the properties must be able to respond to that demand. If an apartment building does not install adequate infrastructure for charging on the property, current tenants are going to move out and go somewhere where they can get it, and prospective new tenants won't even consider the property. So you have to do it. But how do you support it? How do you support these large numbers that are needed? When the big issue is every single building has limited, very finite amount of electrical infrastructure, electrical capacity. And to expand that capacity is prohibitively expensive. At a minimum, it's several $100,000s per property. Some properties could run into the millions. And then you have the issue of connectivity. Most people aren't aware that EVSEs, chargers, do require connectivity over cellular. Well, when you look in most parking garages, if you tried using your smartphone anytime recently in a parking garage, most have very poor cellular coverage to no cellular coverage. So how do you provide connectivity in an environment like that for the EVSEs that's required for most EVSEs to operate? And then you have to look at large scale deployments. I'm talking millions of EVSEs needed, and every apartment building ultimately is going to need dozens, if not hundreds of EVSEs deployed in their garages. Doing those large scale deployments is very complicated, and there are not a lot of players out there that truly understand how to design and engineer such systems. And then, of course, you have the excessive focus on level 3 over level 2. The conversation needs to shift, and it's starting to shift away from level 3 to the real need, which is level 2. So power is finite, and every single building has a limited amount of it. When you look at traditional charging systems and the fact that most buildings may have only 1 to 200 amps of available power, those traditional charging systems you can only support maybe 2 to 5 of those charging stations, those EVSEs, on the 100 to 200 amps. So if a building scales to 10, 20, 50, 100 EVSEs, the building can't unless they spend lavishly on upgrading the electrical infrastructure. So what do you do about it? And the fact is, the only way you can scale to the number of EVSEs that are required in these buildings long-term is to have a data-driven, dynamic, real-time power managed system. Without it, there is no way you're getting to millions of EVSEs cost effectively. You have to have data that comes off those EVSEs driving the decision-making for the system on how to allocate the limited amount of power at that facility. If this isn't happening, then you're locked into that 2 to 5 for 100 to 200 amps situation, and then the property has to look at spending a lot of money to upgrade the infrastructure to go beyond those few chargers. Moving on. And I mentioned connectivity is the other hidden issue. EV charging absolutely requires it. You can go to any provider out there other than EverCharge, because we have a solution for all of this, and say, I'm in a garage, I want to install chargers 3 levels below ground and there's no cellular there. Can you support it? They'll say yes, but you have to go out and bring cellular into your garage. So you got to go to your cellular carriers. You need to buy and have installed at a minimum a cellular repeater system that costs tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're unlucky, you have to buy a distributed antenna system that runs in the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars just to get connectivity into your garage to support chargers. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So Wi-Fi, if you look at Wi-Fi, well, that's great, but Wi-Fi needs availability and access, and it also creates clear cybersecurity risks. And it requires third-party hardware beyond your EVSE. Ethernet cabling is another option, but that's super expensive. Try getting a quote to run Ethernet throughout your parking garage. And then you have the other issue. You cannot have dynamic real-time load management if the decision-making that goes on to determine the allocation of that power is not happening on site without going to the cloud. If it goes to the cloud, the delay will prevent the decision-making from being accurate. And by the way, all of this stuff is left for the building to figure out. Most of the providers out there don't provide a total solution and don't provide the guidance on how to get there. So data-driven EV charging is absolutely required to meet EV demand. It's required to scale to the level of chargers that these buildings will be needing. And the bottom line is, if the EV charging technology that's installed in any property is not data-driven, it cannot scale. And I guarantee you it'll be a rip and replace waiting to happen. Because the minute they want to go beyond a handful of EVSEs, they won't be able to get there without going to a company like EverCharge that can deliver that charging scalability today and for the future. So it's extremely important to look at these networks and the numbers that are needed, not just today, but the reality is the most important decision making is you have to look at the numbers that are being required 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, because the future in electric vehicle charging infrastructure is not long distance future. It's very near term. We're talking months or a few years. And that's what everyone has to remember, that you can't put these decisions off and hope they'll figure itself out, because you don't have enough time, flat out. We've got to get this infrastructure installed today, or we can't continue to scale. That's it. Thank you much. And of course, we'll be taking questions.
Fantastic, Kevin. That was a great overview, and I'm going to call up the rest of our. And that's there's a lot of it. I'm going to throw one thing out there to maybe you can talk to while I call up our next piece here. It's really interesting. You mentioned about the we're lucky we don't have gas stations in all of our in all of our homes or wherever. I saw a pitch from a big energy company trying to recreate, seeming like they're trying to recreate the EV experience by saying, we'll deliver fuel to you, right? And this idea exists. It's not that weird. You do it on job sites for like heavy equipment manufacturing, and somebody will come along and top up all the tractors with bulldozers, whatever it is, with diesel. So it's not weird that way. But I just thought, like, oh my gosh, the liability of having that in everyone's, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, imagine, I only imagine the HOAs. I live in an HOA. They would not know. That would be prohibited so fast. It wouldn't happen. I mean, what's kind of interesting. You bring up, just if you look upon that and just take the EV charging space, there's a lot of what I call niche products either coming to market or being developed, or maybe a few on the market, and they all purport to solve some problem with charging. And the reality is there's no problem with charging. There's none. You put a charger in, it charges the vehicle. The challenge is just getting enough infrastructure out there. So all these niche things, like, I guess somebody will come up with the idea is, I'll drive to your neighborhood and charge your vehicles. You can all pull into the community parking lot in your community and I'll just charge them one after another. I mean, great, but these things are not going to work. You don't need to come up with a new solution. We have all the technology. You just have to be able to get to the scaling point, and that's not difficult to do with the right technology.
Exactly. It's a fine point. And we're going to broaden our discussion here a little bit. Again, for those folks who might have joined us a little bit late, we had a second guest who unfortunately, due to illness, wasn't able to join us today, Gary King, CEO of EV Alliance. Hopefully we'll be able to put a pin in that and have a great discussion with Gary about EVs and smart cities down the road. But I hope, Gary, you're feeling better, and we hope to talk to you soon. And I did want to bring up one more person here, Randy Brown, who is our relatively newly minted Director of Communications here at Sheeva. Randy, maybe give a couple minutes about your background or a couple words about your background, and we'll jump into a discussion.
Sure. Thanks, Trevor. Like Trevor said, my name is Randy Brown. I have been with Sheeva for over 2 months now, so getting there. And my background is I have 15 years experience running communications, marketing, public relations for different organizations. I spent a lot of years in the nonprofit world and then moved over to the technology world. And just very excited about what we're doing at Sheeva. Our team has so much knowledge in connected vehicles, obviously, but in energy, transportation, the automotive industry, and more. And we're just very excited to be able to bring guests like Kevin to webinars like this to hopefully give you useful information and be a resource for you, as well as through all of our other channels.
Fantastic. Randy, welcome aboard. It's good news for us here at Sheeva. We've been growing quite a bit. So, but we will jump in here. And poor Randy, of course, has had to deal with me. A little bit about my background before joining Sheeva. Last 15 years has been energy, but distributed energy, so renewables, but think solar panels on a house, and how that interfaces with the bigger power grid. trading, moving physical electricity around, but not from giant power plants to where it's needed, but from smaller power plants to your neighbors. And this is a challenging for the status quo in our sector. So Randy, unfortunately, has had to deal with listening to me go on a lot about energy and EVs. So it should be an interesting conversation. But I wanted to jump in and to you, Kevin. If you had to describe it, well, maybe I'll put Randy on the spot for 1 second. Randy, if you had to describe in like 3, 4, one word, what you think of the EV space right now for customers, what do you think that would be? You're not an EV owner, so that's
right.
That's fair. Yes.
Yeah, no, and I mean, we've used a lot of words like Wild West and hurricane and things like that. So I think, over the past 10, 15 years, it's been kind of a novel idea, something that will happen eventually. And there were, the experimental small releases and Priuses and Leafs, and then Tesla kind of made it more of a cool thing with the technology. And now that we have all the situations that Kevin was talking about, it's just exploding and becoming a reality. So I think all of those kind of extreme weather words that we've been talking about
yes,
are a good description, and people have a lot of questions about, how is it going to work?
I was thinking about that when I wrote it, and I said, to me, it feels like Montreal at 4 o'clock in the morning in mid-July, in terms of a little bit crazy. Kevin, do you got a couple words other than the word tsunami? You can't use that because you already used it.
Sure. Controlled insanity.
I'm glad you would think it's controlled. That's good.
Yes, it's doable. It's doable because it's controlled.
So and see, that's the thing. So when we bring back into what the customer experience is, there's a lot of things changing at once, right? We're adopting. People are rapidly adopting EVs, and to be fair, the big automakers, I think pretty much every big automaker now has a plan to either stop R&D or entirely sunset the internal combustion engine. So EVs are not stopping. This is not going to be a small category, or even say like it took time to adopt hybrids, right? It's going to be it's a real thing, and there's no turning back. So there is the change in consumer behavior and expectation around that fueling event, right? Going from the gas pump to EV charging. Kevin, you put a really important thumb on that, saying, it's they're both grudge purchases. You don't really want to do them per se, like it's a thing, but you got to do it, right? And while gas takes, and Sheeva enables this too, but gasoline takes, and I'll talk a little bit about that use case. Gasoline takes a couple minutes to, from getting out of your car to enabling the pump, to pumping, and depending on how much gas you need and how big your gas tank is, let's call it 2-3 minutes. In that world, when we talk to them at Sheeva, shaving off a few seconds to give them an opportunity to buy something in the store or do some other kind of positive interaction that maybe they don't think of with the grudge purchase. And they know the reality of, with gasoline is, sure, they can talk about how clean it is or whatever, how good it is, but nobody cares. It's a commodity product, and I'm probably not going to cross the street to go to a Shell station versus an Exxon station because I really love Shell, right? Or I really think Shell's gasoline is better. With EVs, you've pulled that grudge purchase down into many, many minutes. So what do you do with the customer's time? And so I asked this to you, Kevin, like, what do you think the biggest, and I see, you see the adoption of like, well, like you said, pull out the gas pump and put it in an EV charging station, and the gas station is now just an electricity station. No, I don't think that's really going to be the experience. And I know you don't either. But what do you think the biggest challenges to growth are in that, in terms of EVs, in terms of EVs going on the road and the supporting infrastructure. Like, how do we have a bottleneck we got to worry about in the next 6 months, 12 months on that front?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. By the way, one thing I want to point out before I hit that is, the current model. There's a fair number of people that seem to just, they won't drive across the street to save a penny, but they'll go to Costco and stand in line for half hour to save 15 cents. So a lot of that time commitment is massive when you really think how long it takes to get gas. It's not, people just think it's the time to put the thing in the, in your car and push the thing and let it lock and fills up and you drive away. No, you have to drive to the gas station. You have to do the pumping thing and you have to drive away and go back to wherever you were headed. So it's a lot more than 2 to 3 minutes. So when people think about, charging an electric vehicle is so slow, not when you break down the length of time it takes to fuel up a gas car. It really isn't. It's probably less time when you think about it. But going back to your question, I think from the standpoint of the very important 5% public market, and I'm not trying to denigrate that market. I'm just saying the focus needs to get away from that because that's not where the demand really is. But you need to put it on highways. You need to put it on rest stops, and like I drive from Las Vegas, where I live, to Southern California, and there's some very specific stopping points if you do need fuel or want to get a coffee or go to the bathroom or whatever. It's a 3.5 hour drive, 4 hour drive, big deal. But there's just there's a truck stop kind of mecca, if you will, just outside of a place called Barstow. It's called Linwood. And that's where if I stop, that's my stopping point. Big gas stations, decent coffee and all that stuff. And I think to myself, those truck stop locations, those large gas stations that are already geared towards high volume vehicles and truck traffic, you're going to put in a bunch of level 3s. You got to have lots of them, right? You can't just install 2 and have, there's some classic videos on YouTube and stuff of Tesla supercharger networks, in some of these types of places on, big travel days like Memorial Day. And you'll see this queue of cars in the video just going off into the distance, people waiting in line for an hour or two just to charge up their Teslas, which, by the way, is insane also. But that just shows you've got to have the network has to be robust enough to support the expected demand, right? But those level 3s are stupid expensive, right? Just 100 kilowatt one, which is not nearly powerful enough for those applications, is 45, 50 grand without installation. You move into a 300, 350 kilowatt, or obviously much more powerful ones, the more powerful level 3s coming to market, and you're talking a hellacious investment just for the hardware. Then you start talking infrastructure installation, you can double the price, and that's if the grid can support it in that area. So again, you fall back to infrastructure as a main barrier, and then you have cost. Yeah, there's a lot of incentive programs, great. But the incentive programs, even on the level 3 side, have limits to the amount of money you can get per level 3. So even if there's an incentive program that covers an area, the lion's share of that cost is going to be borne by the property or the property owner or management company. So somebody's got to write the check for all those level 3s. And if they don't put in a large number of them, they're just going to create a literal nightmare for their customers, a traffic nightmare, congestion, et cetera. So you have cost, you have infrastructure. Those are 2 massive barriers to the true widespread installation of public-facing high-speed charging in key travel corridors. Again, no one talks about this. They just say, we're going to do it. But
Right.
Stuff, sending a bunch of money to the states is great, but the states have absolutely no flipping idea what they're doing. They have no idea how to do it. They're going to send out RFPs, and then all the level 3 players and others are going to jump on it and go, we'll just take your money. They don't care about doing it right. They just want to take the free money. So, I'm very open to talking about this stuff and hitting these are serious issues. My competition doesn't want to talk about it because they don't have a solution and they want to hide from it. The government doesn't want to talk about it because they just want to throw money at it. But if you don't address this right, we're going to stay at 112,000 chargers for the next 5 years as the money's out there, but it literally just gets pissed away, to be blunt, wasted, or it doesn't get spent. So, you got to look at the technology and how to address it properly, given that those are serious barriers to getting it done.
You touched on something very important too. When we think about the driver experience in a car, or the passenger experience in a car today, and of course, I've been following EV adoption for a while, and I remember having a discussion with some people, some executives at a big automaker, and talking about, they were there to show me their level 5 autonomous car. So for folks who understand, level 5 autonomy means I can go to sleep in the back seat and the car will drive me somewhere. That's the ultimate holy grail. There's a lot of discussion about, well, is it possible or whatever? It's possible. I've seen it. But I remember asking them, like, well, these are all going to be electric, right? And this was several years ago. And they said, yeah, we don't want to, it's political to talk about energy that way. I get it. I get what their point was. The reality is, yes, here we are. They're all going to be electric. But level 5 autonomy, like we're arguing about level 5 autonomy. I'm like, oh, well, level 4 is pretty darn good in terms of the bandwidth as a human being in the car to do other things. And you already see this technology in a new car, in lane assist, assisted parking, all like that. That's really autonomous technology that's being absorbed into the car, right? And it changes human behavior. So therefore, hands at 2 and 10, staring at, please, by all means, everybody out there, please drive safely. Hands at 2 and 10, and eyes focused on the road. Yeah, there are more distractions, and yeah, the distractions are kind of okay. And so that changes. I can think about what I want to be doing as a human 5 minutes down the road, or 10 minutes down the road, or an hour down the road, like to eat, to shop, to change an appointment, to do whatever it is I want to do. You talked about that. And so that's when I look at that, when people come to me with autonomous and say, oh, it'll never happen. At level 5, I'm like, I don't care. Level 4 is pretty darn good. Same for EV charging. I see that same thing of like, we need less time plugged in, so we need more level 3 chargers. They're really expensive. Okay, if I'm changing the consumer behavior and how they do transactions in their car, to you, Kevin, as a guy who puts that stuff in, you're basically telling us level 2 is good enough, right? And we should ask for speed and installation of a network versus waiting on investment decisions from a bunch of private players or whatever it is, right? Is that fair?
Well, yeah, keep in mind that level 2 is the absolute right solution for the vast majority of applications and environments. But in the true public environment, the main travel corridors, where people drive distance, right? I have I-15 here in Vegas. There's I-405 and 5 in California, the north-south, and all across the country. You have these main travel corridors where people drive a long distance. In those environments, it has to be level 3. It has to be high-powered level 3, and it has to be robust. You have to have a bunch of them, which has, as I was mentioned a moment ago, has some very serious challenges to making that happen. Ubiquitous means in all these main areas. When you remove yourself from long distance driving, you flat out don't need level 3, period. Absolutely not. It's all level 2. And obviously, the cost factors are a fraction of level 3. The infrastructure impacts are a fraction. But then in those environments, you have the scalability challenges as well. You've got to put in a lot of level 2s because there's a lot of people that want to use them. They want to plug in and forget about it. They're not going to plug in and move their car 2 hours later. I can tell you, guaranteed 100%, human nature isn't going to change. No one moves their cars. So you go into any apartment or any office building, whatever, someone takes up a parking spot, plugs in, even though their car just drove 8 miles and they don't even need to do that. The charge is finished in 7 minutes. They're there for 12 hours. The car isn't moving. So you have to make sure you put in enough chargers to address the needs and the demands of that building and those people in the buildings. You just have to do it. And anyone that tries to say, no, we'll just implement a policy, we'll punish people if they leave their cars there too long, are asking for a disaster. And they're going to have some really mad people and some, bad outcomes. So robust is the key word here, whether it's public facing on the long distance corridors or private, offices, condos, apartments, fleets, whatever. It has to be robust. You have to put in robust networks, which means a lot of level 2s supported by whatever infrastructure is there using dynamic real-time load management. You have to do it. Otherwise, again, you're just never going to scale you can't scale cost effectively, or you can't scale at all, which of course is the worst outcome, period. Because if you don't scale, then ultimately the adoption rate of electric vehicles will stop. It will literally go off a cliff, because people recognize this so-called promised infrastructure is not coming. I'm not going to continue to drive, 5 miles down the road to plug in for a half hour to charge my car. I'm selling this thing, going back to a gasoline powered car. We don't want that to happen.
Right. And that's a great point. I just want to jump in here too. I see some questions coming in on the chat. We're going to save them for the end. By all means, just want to remind everybody, feel free to answer questions or ask questions in the chat to the panel here, and we will be tackling them. And as we're getting down here on time, getting towards the end of the discussion, Randy, I'll put this one to you. The inflection points in consumer behavior that happen when you adopt a new technology, like like the first smartphones, right? That's something that came into our lives, and it changed a lot of the way we're doing transactions. This to me is like, it's changing it's not just the car getting smarter and more connected and more autonomous, changing the way that the smartphone did, but it's also changing the way, how do I keep that thing going? Like, how do I change the behavior of tending that thing? The difference between the dumb phone in my pocket and a smartphone in my pocket really is just the size of the thing in my pocket. Here we're talking about EVs needing their own needs to maintain the appliance, and then the consumer behavior. What do you think is sort of and again, I know you're not an EV driver, so I don't want you to think of it that way, but just as a consumer, what do you think is the killer app? If there was something to be in that space that would make it easier, like if let's say you're shopping for an EV today, what's the thing you're going to want to care about?
Yeah, well, I think there's obviously the, how do I find a charger that works with my car that I can charge right now if I'm out on the road. And I know that EV drivers, some of my friends have electric vehicles, and it's more, they have to plan further in advance, because, if they're doing a trip of a certain distance, they need to know that they can make it. And they need to know that there's going to be a charger available if they're going to need to stop. So I think, especially with all of the kind of development of charging stations and all this money that's going towards it, how are we going to make sure that electric vehicle drivers can know what charger is available, when they need it, and that it's going to work with their car?
That real time visibility
real time.
into totally agree with you. Kevin, what do you think is there something missing in that? Is there a killer piece of technology or a killer app that you think is missing that can make this easier, or are we just yelling about policy?
No, I don't think we need to dream about the killer app. I know what EverCharge's technology is and what we can do, and none of our competition can do it. We can deliver these things today for level 2. We've been doing it for 9 years, all over the country, and we've been scaling. We have installations with 50, 70, 90 chargers. We have 100 buildings constrained power-wise. We have 30 chargers operating where our competitors could barely get 3. We have 300 unit installs operating on power that, if they went with anyone else, they'd have to upgrade their infrastructure by $4 million. So we are doing this, right? But we're the only ones. And, of course, we have a bunch of cool patents behind our technology as well. But, the reality is, 9 years ago, anybody could have thought of it, but our CEO is the one that thought of it. He recognized 9 years ago that where the limitations are going to be. It just obviously took many years, as with Elon Musk the same way. It took many years to suddenly go from, wow, this is a cool toy, to, oh my gosh, this is not just a cool toy. This is reality. This is the future, right? This is what we need to be driving. So No, I mean, there's no killer app, and we have the technology right now. I think more than a killer app, it's, let me be, as you can tell, I'm a little bit blunt about this, and I think that's what this industry needs is bluntness. We need, the competitors in my space, in the EV charging space, need to stop trying to convince people that which they're, based upon the limitations of their technology, because what they're doing is they're creating, they're pushing off what needs to be done further and further, right? It'd be great if I said EverCharge could handle the entire market throughout all of North America. No one needs to go anywhere else. But obviously, that's la la land fantasy. But we can support any application that fits our technology, which is high volume parking environments. Our competitors need to look at it from the standpoint that, yeah, your technology is too limited. It can't do these things. It can't scale. Figure out how to do it. And then the politicians that keep yapping about public charging need to shut up and literally get out of the way, because they are idiots and don't know what they're doing. Be blunt. No one in Washington, D.C. understands charging, let alone EVs. They don't even know how to use their smartphones. They've proven that. So we keep listening to these people dictating how public charging should be. Free money's great. We all love free money. No one's going to turn down free money. But incentive programs, many of them are actually slowing deployments. They are slowing it down because people are waiting for the free money instead of doing what's necessary and just spending the money, investing the money in the future. No, more importantly, many of those programs, once you apply, they are so backlogged, you can't get a commitment for a year or more that you've been approved for the program, and you're not allowed to install or start any construction until you get that approval. So how do we get there quicker if everyone's waiting for free money, and when they go for the free money, there's a huge delay, and then everyone's saying stuff that just isn't true in the marketplace, and they're not addressing the true subjects. So the killer app is really that. Talk the truth, get out there and deliver what needs to be delivered, and stop delaying based upon money, because adoption is not going to slow down, and we don't want it to fall off that cliff. So
Right. From the customer experience perspective, like there's a lot of analogies here to like the first sort of distributed renewables, that when people it moved, it's the exact same consumer behavior. It moved from being toys for millionaires to like, oh, I can actually do this, and it's actually good for me in terms of my everyday, not just cost. And we could talk about total cost of ownership, which is something that really needs to be sold in terms of EVs. But the cost and the reliability, whatever, all the other host of benefits that go with having that. But again, there was a lot of well-intentioned and poorly intentioned policy around that does get in the way of saying, like, around renewables I'm talking about right now, that made that hard, right? To make it, Bill Maher made a big deal about how long it took him to get solar permitted, I think on his show, like 1,000 days or something by the city and county of Los Angeles. That kind of thing, you just scratch your head and go like, oh, really, can't you just go buy panels at Home Depot and hire a guy to put them on like I do with vinyl siding or something? It really should be that simple. And the consumer behavior changes with that. Well, this has been great discussion. I do want to tackle some questions from the audience here in our last few minutes. One question was, I think you kind of addressed it in your last answer there, Kevin, but somebody's asking specifically, where is EverCharge charging stations located? You guys are like multi-unit buildings and so on. You don't really have a public network. I think maybe that's what the question here was.
We're not a player in that public highway byway space. You're not going to pull into an EverCharge level 2 and in those environments. We are in private environments, as I mentioned, apartments, we're the leading provider for EV charging level 2 in apartments and condos in the country. Where we're heavy into the fleet space, mixed use, commercial, industrial, office, education. So if you find one of our EVSEs, there are some public facing EverCharges in some of those garages. You might pull into one and you can charge at one. It's a decision made by the property though. If they want to have, because our chargers can be public facing. We have QR codes on them for public use, but that's a building specific decision, not one that we make for our customers.
Very good, very good. Well, there's a second question here that's actually and a little bit to what we just talked about policy and so on. Internal policy within the big incumbent players. I can say the same issue with renewables was always the big incumbent utilities don't necessarily, to quote Homer Simpson, "Thou shalt not horn in on thy brother's racket," right? They don't necessarily like the idea of a bunch of people running off and building their own little power plants on their roof, right? So the changing that behavior, the consumer behavior changes faster than the incumbent provider's behavior, right? So it's a good question here from a member in the audience. Is there data on the vehicle that is needed for charging management that is not currently available, i.e. protected by OEMs? And if so, is that a headwind? Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, they're absolutely, the OEMs are very protective of the data coming off of their vehicles because they feel they own the data and they don't want to risk someone else getting their hands on it. So, but I mean, there's movement in the industry to open that up more, of course. And I think the OEMs recognize that data really is key to the continued growth of the industry, right? And how you can continue to innovate charging technology. I mean, we do some really cool stuff to scale our chargers exponentially, as I mentioned, to get more data. I mean, I don't know if it's headwind that's part of the evolution of the industry. It's going to come. Now, what it looks like, does it come from a licensing deal with the OEMs? Do you pay for that data? Whatever it is, you know, the OEMs recognize the value of the data, just like they recognize that some of them are going to get into being in the energy business as well. So and we know the OEMs tend to move slow, right? The legacies at least do, you know, which, you know, they've been around for 120 years. It's hard to turn a giant aircraft carrier like that quickly, but they've obviously woken up in a huge way in the last couple of years. And you look what the accomplishments of GM and Ford, which is phenomenal, and the products they're putting out, and their commitment to getting, you know, being all electric vehicles in the near future. So I think it's just something that's going to happen more than something to really worry about as headwind. It's gonna be there in some form and be very helpful to the industry.
Right. It is a very you know, we used to say that about the. I'll make. Thanks, by the way. I think that covers all our questions for the audience. I know I have to manage the time on this because I think precisely at the top of the hour we get cut off. But I would say just around that issue, you know, yeah, I look at the space and say as a customer behavior piece, right? And again, we're always focused on the customer's experience in you know, using their EV charge. What do they do with it? The old line energy companies have often given away the data or the knowledge about their customer base in a request to be, you know, from a third-party rewards program to say, oh, come in here and fill up and get points or whatever, stars or miles or something. And you know, but it's just like, oh, well, you do it because, you know, the rewards company says, oh, here's what are the 10 things that human beings buy all the time? Well, one of them is gasoline. So let's go to find some gasoline partners. And the gasoline partner's like, oh, well, it's a margin or more tank of gas from that customer over a quarter. And so I'm in, but they've given away all their customer data. And that's critical for them to be able to understand what the experience will be like going forward. Anyway, I want to make sure I wrap this up and say thank you to everybody. Thanks, Kevin, for joining us. Thanks, Randy, as well for joining us here today. I hope you guys out there in the audience learned from this. Again, recording will be available and keep an eye out in your inbox too for our next webinar on this. We're looking at the customer retail experience or something around smart cities coming up, and probably in the next quarter. So we hope you join us here again. And again, on behalf of all of my colleagues at Sheeva and from our guest today, thank you very much, and we will talk to you soon.